my God, what is that? What is that?
Found footage seems to be the take it or leave it type of horror genre. While it's not quite as prevalent as the slasher era or a more generic one like vampires or werewolves, it has a surprising amount of entries. For a while there, it was the go-to for a lot of companies, and apparently we even almost got a Friday the 13th that was found footage, which I kind of want to see. While Paranormal Activity became a franchise off this conceit, and a lot of directors now use it as a metaphorical journey, the little independent film that could in 1999 is often credited with being the first found footage film. Blair Witch came after things like Cannibal Holocaust and even The Last Broadcast from the year before, but is seen as the progenitor of the whole damn genre. While it's certainly got a place in the history books, does the Blair Witch Project stand the test of time? The genesis of the movie began in 1993 at the University of Central Florida when a couple of students named Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez decided to turn their love of documentaries and horror films into a movie of their own. They found themselves to be more scared of documentaries on purportedly real paranormal subjects than of your standard fictional horror flicks. With inspiration from shows like In Search of and horror documentaries like Chariots of the Gods and The Legend of Boggy Creek, they set about to mix their favorite things together and form production company Haxan Films. Haxan Films itself is based on the OG horror documentary from Sweden called Haxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages, made in 1922 and eventually released stateside in 1968. The script for the eventually named Blair Witch Project was only 35 pages, but they ended up shooting 20 hours of footage that was edited down to a lean 81 minutes. It was first released at Sundance in January of 1999, with a wider release on January 14th that same year. The movie was about as successful as any independent movie has ever been. The final budget landed in the admittedly vague range of $200,000 to $750,000, which much of that going into the advertising campaign, but more on that later. The two college students shared writing and directing duties, while one of the stars, Heather Donahue, is credited with the in-movie documentary script. Donahue stars as Heather, with Michael Williams and Joshua Leonard starring as their characters with their same first names like Heather did. They were deliberately chosen for this as their first film, and I would say that while all 5 principal creators have been successes since this movie, it's damn hard to get out of the shadow of a giant like this. Sanchez has had the longer-lasting career of the two directors, with a few feature films and eventually becoming a solid director of episodic TV. Leonard has had the largest impact as an actor, with 90 credits to his name, including larger roles in movies by Soderbergh and Adam Green. The movie has a rather simple premise, as if you couldn't tell by the 35-page script, that follows 3 student filmmakers as they shoot a documentary on the Blair Witch in Burkittsville, Maryland. Well, we are watching the footage that was found of them making the documentary as they never returned from the woods. The movie presents this as real, with the footage saying it was from 1994, 5 years before you were watching this on the big screen. The first section of the film gets the 3 students together and makes it clear that they aren't old friends, just students making the film together. They ask a bunch of locals about the legend of the Blair Witch, and after having enough footage, head into the forest to investigate some of the places they were told about. They run into a couple of fishermen who tell them about another tale that surrounds the legend before finding Coffin Rock, a key location tied to the tales. They camp for the night, and over the next 6 days, the trio is toyed with and tortured. They hear unsettling and unexplained things at night, continue to get further lost in the woods, and become distrustful of each other and the situation. Josh disappears after a couple days, and while Mike and Heather hear screaming, they never find his body, although Heather finds a tied-up knapsack with some gross remains in it. The final night, Heather and Mike hear Josh again and decide to try and save him. They follow the screams to an abandoned building but find no Josh and no way out. Heather sees Mike staring at a wall, and the camera drops. Footage ends. Movie over. This one is kind of a layup, but cell phones. They don't have them in the movie, and that would obviously solve a lot of their problems, or at least force the writers into coming up with a reason they can't text, call, or look up maps. A lot of movies today try and capture that feeling by setting their movie in an era that didn't have the technology, but it's always refreshing to watch a movie that is era appropriate, and you know that the tech didn't exist. That's not to say that cell phones and primitive GPS devices didn't exist. Movies were more than happy to show off the snooty, rich business guy that could bust out his brick cell phone where he had to pull out the antenna. They just weren't the pocket computers we have now, nor did nearly everyone have easy access to them. Another sign of the times is how our students go about getting their information and telling their story. Just like cell phones, a basic version of the internet existed that would have enabled them to look up newspaper articles and photographs for research. They also could have found any books on the topic to help get prepared for their journey and to build out their narrative. While even today, boots-on-the-ground journalism, talking to the actual people or visiting the actual places, 1999 would have had that as one of the only options. 2023? You could look up multiple YouTube videos that told the complete story and take clips from tons of different sources so that you wouldn't even need to step foot in the woods. Similarly to the GPS and cell phone dilemma, what they were shooting with for their film is era appropriate. It's refreshing to see people use the items available to them rather than the creators use old technology by placing the film in a prior decade. As much as we all love the 80s for horror, it would be nice to not have seemingly every movie decide to take us back to that quaint time. Place it in 2023 and figure out how to get past using all the conveniences we have now. Let the 80s be. We don't need to improve those bad boys. The best part of this movie, beyond the use of found footage, beyond the scares, is the marketing. The Blair Witch Project is an absolute masterclass in how to get hype for your movie. We mentioned the actors being chosen partially because it was their first role, but they flat out made it out to be a real piece of lost media. They were reported as lost and even on IMDb had their credits listed as currently missing, presumed dead. They weren't big names and hadn't been seen anywhere, so this was at least feasible, and 1999 internet was a lot different than today with how many places were reporting things, and just the sheer number of outlets for information. The actors regretted using their real names as it made it difficult to get roles for them after, particularly Donahue. The film launched its own website, which had fake newsreels and interviews, as well as created police reports to drive home the fact that these kids were actually gone. They passed out missing poster flyers at Sundance to create atmosphere, and it worked. There was a large-scale debate on what parts of the movie, if any, were real. They did small batch screenings at colleges across the country and leaked a trailer on the website Ain't It Cool News before securing a smaller spot before Star Wars The Phantom Menace. What a power move! 2 days before the wide release on July 14th, a mockumentary appeared on the Sci-Fi Channel that took a deep dive into the lore and around the fictionalized legend. Curse of the Blair Witch would be an almost prequel to the events seen in the movie 2 days later and was a huge success. Elsewhere, the lean runtime of the movie works very well, as any more than the 81 minutes would wear out its welcome. The actors do a good job conveying their fear and desperation, and part of that has to be attributed to how the film was shot and them not knowing exactly what they were going to see and only being left clues on where to head next. They were smart with their limited budget, and you don't actually ever see anything. This is a case of less being more, and that almost wasn't the case. We almost got a look at what would have been the Blair Witch, but they messed up the shot. Based on the description of a guy wearing all white with pantyhose on his head, I'd say we dodged a bullet. The movie just simply isn't as effective as it was when it was first released. I was lucky enough to see this in a packed art house theater at 14 years old, and it was a revelation. Now, not only is it somewhat of a slog to get through, but when I show it to new people, it's seen as more quaint than something never been done before. This is not a bad movie. I'll gladly accept the torches and pitchforks being sharpened as the review goes on, but I need to get that across. The Blair Witch was and is a good movie. It just doesn't resonate like it used to. I'd argue that its two big predecessors, 1980's Cannibal Holocaust and 1998's The Last Broadcast, are more memorable and hold up better today. The other parts that don't shine like they used to are the camera and some of the interactions between actors.
I want to make movies, Heather.
The camera movement, while understandable with non-camera people often operating it, is hard to focus. Many movies that came after were able to fix this problem, but here, it's a tough watch. While some of the scenes, particularly the argument after one of the students admits to kicking the map into the river,
It was useless! I kicked that fucker into the creek!
Heather's final first-person apology are riveting, a lot of it is nothing special. Some of it, like the interviews or attempts at investigative journalism, just fall flat or even outright bad in a distracting way.
Those black hair, like a horse.
Like fur?
Yeah, like a fur, like horse fur.
This was a hard one, but the ultimate answer is no. The Blair Witch doesn't stand the test of time almost 25 years later. The simple answer or analog I can give to this is respecting a movie and it holding up are two different things. The Universal monster movies of the 30s and 40s were like nothing we'd ever seen on screen, but you know what? Hammer did each of them better a couple of decades later. In line with that, Blair Witch helped create a boom, one that is still going today, but it has been bettered by things like Wreck or the Poughkeepsie tapes. It was lightning in a bottle, and I don't see its marketing push ever being matched, but even its own property has only gone downhill with two very different sequels that don't quite hit the mark, and video game material that never added anything to their respective genres. It would be different if the genre just didn't exist anymore. Silent films still hold up because, apart from things like The Artist, you just don't see them anymore. Modern Times will never not hold up, partially because of its genius, but also because it will never be attempted again. Blair Witch is a movie that will be on watch lists forever going forward, but taken now, it just misses the mark.